And anyhow, you come back from this life on earth to be with God. One of the things I want to talk about is how do you see and how do you bring about that success from the time that you come down into this box called earth, this life of yours? How do you make it work fine? That's fine, Jim. That's much better, thanks. How do you work that life out for yourself? There's a fellow who wrote a lot about success and how you do it, and it's one of the people I've been reading some of his works this last couple of years. His name is Napoleon Hill. Some of you may know that name, others may not. He's just a figure. Napoleon Hill was a young fellow who had a goal in his life was to be successful. And he did everything he could, and he kept knowing and finding each day how to live out that success. And so one of the things he says, his primary drive to success was this: thoughts are things, and they are powerful things when they're mixed with purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for translation into goodness for ourselves and for others. So his whole notion is that we are driven, actually called to be successful. But how do we do that? Because success for me is very different from each of your successes. And each of your successes that are sitting around each of these tables is so very different from the person next to you. We have some common goals in life, but what I am meant to be and what you are meant to be is yours. And it's important to find out what that is. One of the things Napoleon Hill says is a goal is a dream with a deadline. And that's the important part, with a deadline. You just can't let it, well, I'll work on it next year. I'll work on it next Lent. If you want it to be successful, you've got to set yourself, in a sense, a deadline. And he also said action is a measure of your intelligence. If you really pay attention to what you're doing, it leads you to action. It doesn't sit there and say, well, I think I'd like to do this or do that. There's a fellow that wrote a book called 3 Feet from Gold. And it's just a story of a fellow who was out in the West when they were discovering oil. And he went out with some of his family and they bought a piece of property, bought all the equipment in, and dug down, and they discovered gold. And he said, oh, we've made it. We have done it. And then they kept drilling, and there was dirt and not gold. Now, how many of you have ever mined gold? Probably not one of you in this room. But if you want to know about gold and where you find gold, where you find gold, it's a vein that runs horizontal to the top of the earth. It does not run perpendicular to the earth. So he drilled through his gold, and there was no more. And he tried it again, no more. And so what he did was, there was a garbage collector who came to get the trash from the gold miners' camps where they were, and he sold it to the fellow for dirt cheap. But the fellow had the brains to go ask somebody, what do I do to see if there's really gold down there when there's his experience? And he said, well, I'm glad you came and asked. He never came and sought our advice. It runs horizontally. And if you've ever seen pictures in caves of gold, it's on the line in the wall. So this man dug his hole and then went that way, became a multi-millionaire. Because he sought the advice of other people who knew what they were doing and knew something about that. So the idea here is when you think, I want to be this, I want to do that, it's nice to think about that, but it's also important to ask other people, how does this really work? You know, sometimes growing up, you had that experience, you're working with your kids. Here, this guy, his name was Darby, he had 3 feet from gold, because he went down 3 feet. He had a little bit of gold, but never had the vein that went that way. So that's a thing. We've got to find out from other people what to do and how to do it. What is related to that in your life as a sodalist is this. You pray a lot. You do a lot of these kinds of things that are good for you all as a group. You do it for a parish. It's a good thing for a parish. But what about yourself? What are you getting out of it besides your fellowship or fraternity or your sorority-ness with the other ladies in the Sodality? Well, it's important that you see that with regard to prayer. Because prayer is very much like that vein of gold. You drill through prayer, and after a while, it becomes boring, dry, and I don't get anything out of it. Feel that way? Many, many times when you pray. The idea is find out by reading some of the saints who tell you how to pray, what to pray, when to pray. Because all of that is so critically important in your life. And you have to be persistent. There's a story that I picked up on the road talking to people and listening to them. It's called the 50-cent lesson of persistence. And this took place during the days around just prior to the Civil War. And this gentleman had this big farm down in the south doing cotton. And he had a number of African Americans there working on the farm. And one day he's in there repairing some of the tools. And this little girl comes in. And she just says to him, she stands there, and he turns around and he notices she's standing there. What do you want, little girl? My mammy says send her 50 cents. And he looked at her and said, you go home and tell your mammy I'm not sending her anything. And he turned around to his table to continue working. She stood there. And he had never been so rebuffed by anyone like that little girl. Turned again. I told you to go home. My mammy says send 50 cents. He turned around. He said, the next time I turn around, you better be gone because I'm going to whip you if you don't. He's working. And he turns around and she's still there. And he says, I told you to get out of here and this is the last time. My mammy said, send me 50 cents. And he thought, and he turned to one of his workers, and the worker said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, give her the 50 cents. Give her the 50 cents. Because she was persistent. And we have to do that with prayer, and what we are doing with our prayer. And to do that, you also have to nurture that prayer, not by just saying more prayers. But you've got to do it like you do in the Sodality, some of the religious functions that you have. By reading the Bible, by reading of the lives of saints who have become great teachers about prayer. Because most all of them will tell you how hard prayer has been in their lives. There's a quote from a Henley, an English poet. He's the fellow that actually was Robert Louis Stevenson's inspiration for Long John Silver. His name was W.E. Henley. I don't know that William Edward, maybe, who knows. But he was an English poet. And he wrote these words, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And that little girl believed that. That little girl was not going to be, thwarted by that man's nonsense. She was going to do what she was sent to do by her mother. And she was going to get it done because that was her duty. Her mother said, get this done. And I think you have to realize, as Napoleon Hill says, think of the thoughts in your head. Think of how you can control those thoughts and what they do for you once you get them going. And you've got to almost like magnetize your mind so that if I want to be this, I will always have that magnet drawing me to what I want. Because I have that built upon my faith, and not just a hope or I want, but a firm, strong desire to have that.